All right, good afternoon, guys. Thank you for being here, and joining us today are Major General Derek Rydholm, Deputy to the Chief of Air Force Reserve, and Brigadier General Diana Holland, Commander, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, South Atlantic Division. They're going to talk to you today about hurricane relief efforts and what their services have done in support of it. General Rydholm,
thanks,
please.
Hey, first off, I appreciate having the opportunity to stand here and hopefully be able to answer the questions that you would have about what we're doing in support of the hurricanes and any of the other kind of natural disasters we've had. And I'm standing in on behalf of my boss, Lieutenant General Marion Miller, that couldn't make it here today. But we're here to represent the more than 69,000 reserve citizen airmen that are currently serving in the United States Air Force Reserve. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen numerous natural disasters, and I would tell you that I have firsthand knowledge in that. I have a house in Key Largo, Florida, and for Hurricane Irma, I was actually in Miami when it struck. I had evacuated out of the Keys, but it's humbling to see the amount of luck that I had and the minimal damage that I had. But our hearts go out to everybody that's been impacted by the multitude of different events that we've had, and large swaths in the states, partners in Mexico, the Caribbean, the islands. Just a lot of stuff, and additionally, even reaching out to the West Coast, to the California wildfires and other things. We have three special units in the Reserve Command that do the hurricane hunting mission, the aerial spray mission, which has been active during these events, and the wildfire missions as well. So we're quite proud of what they've done in support of the efforts. And we anticipate here, with all the 4 Atlantic hurricanes we've seen, and just the instability that we've seen lately, that we're here prepared to do as much as we can and continue to work that and to support everyone that's been affected by this. So well before Harvey made landfall, until the season is over and the wildfire season is over, we'll be there, and we'll be through volunteerism and other forces here to support as a supporting agency in the Department of Defense to all the rest of our partner agencies in this time of difficult time. So over to General Holland.
Thank you, sir. Well, good afternoon, and I too thank you for being here today. As is already mentioned, I'm Diana Holland, and I represent the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Over the past few weeks, the Corps of Engineers has been heavily engaged in supporting our states and territories following 3 hurricanes, Harvey, Irma, and Maria. And so, like the General here, I'd like to express our thoughts and prayers for those affected by these storms. We recognize that there are people who have lost a home, their belongings, potentially their livelihood, and it's for that reason the people of our organization, the organization I represent, feel so passionate about doing everything possible to help. So just a little bit about who we are. I command one of 9 divisions of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the South Atlantic Division. The area of responsibility of our division includes the southeastern United States as well as the Caribbean islands. So, as you can imagine, the entire impact of Irma and Maria was felt in our region. And so our division is the lead for the Corps of Engineers in the hurricane response following Irma and Maria. The areas in our region affected include Georgia, Florida, the Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. And just to briefly describe the complexity of this, 2 storms, which each brought unique impacts requiring specific resources and expertise, 2 states, 2 territories, 4 governors, 2 FEMA regions, and so on. It has been truly remarkable to watch the broad U.S. government response, and I'm happy to report that we're working very closely together in support of those governors' priorities. So as I mentioned, each state and territory has its own requirements, but there are some things that remain consistent. We share the desire to reunite families, get survivors out of shelters and hotels, and get back to their homes and restore some normalcy. So our role in this is, as we like to say, FEMA's engineers. They give us our missions, and our missions are what you might expect engineers to do. Debris removal, and when I talk about debris removal, I mean high volume, in the hundreds of thousands of cubic yards. Infrastructure assessments, temporary emergency power restoration, Temporary roofing. Some of you may be familiar with blue roof, and I can talk more about that later, but that's one of the primary things we do when residences are damaged, and temporary housing. And then in collaboration with the United States Coast Guard and NOAA, we work really hard with the ports authorities to help them open the ports. So our approach to this support to FEMA is right people, right place, early. And here's what I mean by that. Early on, before Irma, we pre-positioned our soldiers and civilians, selected because they have certain specific skill sets, on the island so that as soon as Hurricane Irma passed, they could quickly assess the damage and begin to plan for the required support. We anticipated that ports of entry would be closed, and they were. Had we not been on those islands in advance, along with the other agencies, we would not have been timely. We would have been subject to the same delays that others faced because the airports and the ports were closed. Same approach for Florida. Although in the case of Florida, we don't face the same logistics challenges as we do on the islands, because the ability to transport people and supplies by ground is a key advantage. Then similarly, as Maria approached, we had the right people in place so that after the storm, they could quickly restart our efforts. Right people, right place, early. Last week I had the privilege to visit Florida, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, and unfortunately, as you've seen in all of the images, a lot of damage across the board. And that was before Maria struck the territories. Our teams, which sheltered there during the hurricanes, were able to begin their assessments of the damage yesterday morning following the storm. And the assessments continue. The airports are damaged and closed, although I've just learned that the airport in Puerto Rico has opened to military traffic. The ports are closed. Of course, a lot of power outages, roads blocked by debris, water damage, the things you would expect following a major hurricane. These assessments will continue over the next several days, but all of us that support FEMA's response are acting. And so here's what some of those actions are. We're looking at our ports on Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands and are working with NOAA and the Coast Guard to survey the channels so that we can confirm that they are safe to open. We will assist FEMA and the islands in emergency repairs at the airports in San Juan and Virgin Islands. Power. So with power, other things are manageable. So it's really one of our first priority. We're helping to assess power on both Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, particularly in the hospitals, health clinics, and wastewater treatment plants. We've restarted the Blue Roof program in the Virgin Islands. So Blue Roof refers to FEMA's 10-millimeter blue sheeting that can be installed over a damaged roof, providing protection from additional rain and allowing people to leave shelters and return home. In fact, we think tomorrow that the first blue roof in the Virgin Islands will happen, and that will be a huge milestone and a real morale boost for the people of the Virgin Islands. And as we look to the weeks and months ahead, we will continuously right-size the response teams to ensure we have the right capabilities in place, that we're balanced across all of these regions with the right leaders at the right time as the recovery continues. So in closing, you know, we're just over halfway through the hurricane season. And that's important for us to remember. 1 November is kind of the mark on the wall where we see the end of that season. So though we focus our attention on the response to Irma and Maria, we also must remain prepared and flexible in the event we have another storm. I'd like to talk briefly about our people. So our essential soldiers and civilians of the Corps of Engineers who were on Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands following Irma chose to remain in place despite warnings that Maria could be a major hurricane and despite being offered the opportunity to evacuate. They wanted to be in position to help as soon as possible, and they wanted to show the people of those two territories that we're in this together. It has really been an inspiration to be a part of this effort. So one point of nuance. Many of the hundreds of the Corps of Engineers who are part of this response aren't actually assigned to the division I command. They come from across the United States, including Hawaii, Alaska, Seattle, Tulsa, Sacramento, Buffalo, New York, and many other places. Without exception, when I've asked our team, how do they feel about the mission, serving in Georgia, Florida, Puerto Rico, or the Virgin Islands, they say, I can't imagine being anywhere else. I want to help. I want to make this right for people who have lost so much. So in closing, there's a long road ahead, but as a representative of the Army Corps of Engineers, I can say we're committed to this no matter how long it's required. Thank you for your attention and your patience, and I guess we're happy to answer your questions.
Absolutely.
Idris.
Sure. You sort of mentioned this in your remarks, but other than the electrical grid, could you talk about how widespread the sort of devastation is in regards to schools and hospitals, and how long do you think it's going to take you to complete your assessment on the damage?
I think it's going to be many days before we have a good picture on on the whole scope of this. The first thing we start with is the essential services. So, like I said, the hospitals, the clinics, some of the government buildings, because they need that in order to continue to manage the response. So I can't say exactly how long it's going to take, but it's going to be weeks before we know the full scope. That doesn't mean that we don't start for a few weeks. But the major assessment and the overall complete restoration on Puerto Rico will take some time.
What about the schools and hospitals? Sort of where does the other infrastructure other than the electrical grid sort of stand right now?
So I don't know right now beyond power. I mean, we do know that the power outages is extensive, between 95 and 100% right now. So it will, and without power, then you potentially have issues with water. But all of that is still being assessed right now.
Lucas?
You mentioned, ma'am, an airport in Puerto Rico is now open to military traffic. Which airport was that?
San Juan, the major airport.
Can either of you outline the military assistance to the Virgin Islands right now?
I can speak to some degree to that. We have had air mobility aircraft that have gone down through the Air National Guard. We've taken special tactics teams, and members of those teams are the types of people that would open airports. That's some of the stuff that they can do. We've also provided humanitarian aid through mobility aircraft with MREs and water and other things, and that's ongoing through Air Mobility Command and U.S. Transportation Command.
And finally, how does the response to these hurricanes differ from the response to Hurricane Katrina?
Yeah, I really don't have the background to make that comparison.
No folks or anything?
I know we do have lessons learned. The Corps of Engineers does have lessons learned. I don't know that off the top of my head, though.
Just with the string of recent storms, is there any concern that the military is being stretched too thin by these disasters, and what, if anything, are you doing to combat that?
So I can only speak for the Corps of Engineers. I can't speak for the whole military. But I know that we do have a lot going on, but we're always mindful that we have to balance the different tasks and make sure that we are ready to respond to the next one. So I think the Corps of Engineers is postured to do so, but I can't speak for all of DOD.
So I'll speak for a lot of the aspects of DOD. If you look, this is really a joint engagement. You've got assets from the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Army, the Air Force are all working together, the Air National Guard to a large degree. Our people, specifically talking to our reserve airmen, our people love to do this because the human emotion side of this, when you're able to deliver water to people that have been without power in some of the hottest times of the year and humid times of the year, with insects and other things, and having experienced that myself in 1992 with Hurricane Andrew, to see a Red Cross food truck come and deliver a hot meal after being out trying to go through debris is wonderful. So the people that we've talked to and the people that we've sent down there are very happy to do the mission. This is a type of mission, these are the types of things that our air mobility large aircraft are very good at. We have responded in all natural disasters through the islands of Haiti and other places in the past. I think we're fine because our air crew members and our crew members of our mobility aircraft get great training on these missions, and these are the types of things that we're good at. And we've got people that are lining up to continue to support, and I think we're doing just fine there.
You said you have to be mindful to make sure you're balancing. Could you give some examples?
Well, for example, as Florida, as we complete the temporary power mission in Florida, we're always measuring how many people do you need in Florida, because we want to be, whether they go somewhere else or they redeploy and be ready for a future storm. We're just always mindful of the troop to task and making sure we have the right number that's actually required. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Just on the temporary power in Puerto Rico, you talked about that effort and obviously the scale, 95 to 100% of the island being without power. Is temporary power primarily, is that generators, and is there a capacity issue? I mean, with such a large island and trying to just temporary power in terms of fuel and the number of generators, are you requisitioning them from elsewhere? I mean, that scale, how are you tackling that?
FEMA flies in generators, supplies us with the generators. Well, they don't necessarily fly them in. They have distribution centers already pre-positioned there. They will bring in more as more are required.
Do you have an estimation on how many will be required?
I do not know how many generators.
Nancy?
One of the things we're hearing from Puerto Rico is residents there don't have comms, and so they're not able to communicate whether they're safe or not, and there's been a lot of frustration from people here trying to find out about their loved ones. Can you give us any assessment in terms of what, if anything, is being done to restore communications, and when Puerto Ricans can expect to have the ability to communicate that their loved ones, to their loved ones, that they're okay?
I can't give you a time frame, but what I can tell you is that we are able to fly mobile comm support in, and that is ongoing. And we have heard the same things that you're saying and the frustrations associated with that, but that's the types of efforts that we have. I can't talk to you about scope and how soon, but I can tell you that we're doing that.
Is that mobile comm support for the military, or is it for citizens as well?
No, I think it's more for the citizens, but realize that we also, along with that, are able to bring other first responders, if you will. So we're able to fly on our mobility aircraft firefighters, search and rescue, and other civil support as well.
But can you give me a sense? Is it days? Is it weeks before? Just kind of help the public get a sense of when they might be able to reach their loved one.
I wish that I could, but as General Holland said, until, think about it, until probably today, there was no real understanding at all of the level, the gravity of the situation. So until someone can take a look at that, I mean, just having done Irma in Miami and looking at the volume of power that was out in the state of Florida for a relatively light event, at least in the Miami area, I think it's going to take a while. But until they have a chance to take a look at that, I wouldn't want to speculate with a time frame.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to go back to the question about being stretched too thin. You said you were doing fine. But as you assess the devastation, which is likely to be widespread devastation, do you anticipate that there's going to be a need for additional military resources, or are you expecting to make, requests for more? Can you talk at all about what that
Well,
might be?
I don't know that I can answer that purely, but as the military, through U.S. Northcom and others, as the Department of Defense is in support of other agencies like USAID and others, until we get that request for support, it's difficult for us to say what assets we have available. Do I personally believe that this is going to be a long road to recovery in many cases? I absolutely do, because I've watched this over the years for various other events. But I would tell you very, very firmly that the entirety of the Department of Defense takes this very seriously, and these are our homes and our neighbors and our friends as well. And we have evacuated some of our own personnel in preparation for these storms, and now have gone back in support of the storms with those same assets and those same personnel. So we will be there for the long run.
Courtney.
Two quick ones, General. What is a mobile comm support? Are those like mobile cell phone tower, small tower, like receptors or some sort? Or what is that?
I'm not a comm person, so it would be unfair for me probably to go into the nitty-gritty of that. But suffices to say, if you look at what the Department of Defense has done through history, in light of some of our wars, we have opened austere airfields, and we have specific units that have the talents and capabilities to open runways, open airfields, and provide the infrastructure support there. So I would hesitate to go any deeper into that because it's not my background, but we're pretty good at this stuff. So I think we'll be there doing the best we can.
Okay, and then just one more. I know it's early, but have you seen any signs in, I guess particularly in Puerto Rico, of any security problems yet? That of any issues on the ground with looting or anything like that?
I'm not aware of any. I have not heard that.
I'm unaware as well.
Corey.
Ma'am, going back to Hurricane Harvey, are there still Corps of Engineer assets responding to that storm?
Yes.
Can you tell us what they're doing at this point?
You know, I'm not, I probably couldn't. Another division oversees that particular storm. I do know that they are steadily redeploying personnel out of Texas, either to come to Florida or Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico, because the requirements, you know, once the state and other agencies take on some of these tasks, it's not as, the Corps of Engineers' expertise isn't necessarily required quite as much as they are in the early stages, so.
Can you give us an idea of the numbers you guys have in Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and in Florida?
Yeah, so total right now across all of the islands, the Corps of Engineers employees are 127. Okay, so, you know, I think a lot of how we leverage the response is through contracts, whether local contracts or contracts coming from the continental United States. So that's why that number, you know, 127, I think to a lot of folks that doesn't seem like a lot, but it's the right expertise that knows how to leverage the acquisition contracting tools to hire local businesses to do some of this relief if they're able to.
And then it sounds like some of these folks have essentially responded to 3 hurricanes in a row. How taxing is that on them, you know, personally? Is there any precedent for that? I mean, is it?
I know we've had years of 4 hurricanes in our particular region in one season, so I don't think this is unprecedented. The folks that I have talked to that have gone from storm to storm, first of all, you couldn't tell them no. They're not going to be told no. We make sure, though, that they do have an opportunity to go home, to refit, to rest, and before they get on the airplane to go to the next storm. But this is, you know, they're very driven by the purpose of helping, so it's not a bad problem to have, I guess.
Our 403rd Wing hurricane hunting weatherbirds, this is what they do. So although it has been a significantly higher storm season, it is not uncommon for them to fly out of one hurricane and into the other. They at times do it from forward stage locations. They will continue throughout the hurricane season, and they're going to provide tremendous information to help the national assets to understand the potential for any future storms.
Elizabeth?
Can you just walk us through what will happen next in Puerto Rico now that the airport's open for military aircraft? What does that look like in the next hours, days?
You know, I'm not sure exactly of what FEMA will direct specifically, but I do know for us, our next move is to get another headquarters from the Army Corps of Engineers. A colonel who works in our organization will lead additional leaders and staffing to go into Puerto Rico and organize the Corps of Engineers response. So that's our next step. We think that's going to happen Sunday or Monday timeframe, and then by then we'll have the missions, more assessment, and we'll have additional understanding of what the missions are going to be. And then they'll start implementing the different contracts to start, whether it's blue roof or removing debris. We're a little bit dependent, well, we're very dependent on the governor's priorities. And so as he sees the magnitude of this and he develops his priorities, that's then how that works. He then relays that to FEMA, and then if FEMA decides the Corps is the avenue to go to employ our skills, then we'll receive those orders.
But it won't be until Sunday or Monday for like the comms equipment or...
It's all based on the request, and as a supporting agency, we would see that. My expectation would be, because I think they've already been doing this in the islands, that the Puerto Rico Air National Guard will be heavily engaged in support of any activities required, to include if there were issues with whomever asked the question about looting and other things. They provide security. But I would also expect that based on those requests, we would have mobility aircraft, which is one of the reasons it's good to get the military airfield open first. We'll be bringing in needed supplies and support based on other agency requests to the department.
Today or tomorrow.
I can't tell you, Mike. All I would tell you is through U.S. Northcom, that they are likely getting requests right now, and my expectation would be, because we respond very rapidly, that if there has been a request for Department of Defense support there, it is probably already happening, and we just don't realize it.
Okay, guys. If that's it, we're sitting at about the 30-minute. You have one more question? That's fine. Please go ahead.
Sir, you had mentioned that some of your personnel are in these affected areas, and you said that you personally live in the area. I was just wondering if I could ask you a personal question. Sure. How did Key Largo fare, and how did your own?
Key Largo did okay. It was interesting because as a person who has watched this before, I moved to Key Largo because of Hurricane Andrew, so I understood, but the people that live in the Florida Keys have not been struck by a storm of any magnitude for the majority of the last 2 centuries. So Key Largo, from my perspective, did pretty good. But based on the fact of where the eye hit and how quick the winds dissipate, you don't have to start going very far south to where you see major devastation. Now, because I was in Miami and we were unable to get people back into the Florida Keys, at the last moment we chose to go out of there based on the turn of the eye and where we felt that it was going to impact. So we went actually into Miami, did not go back down to the Keys, but I've been keeping contact through internet, Facebook, online phone videos and pictures. So I have a pretty good idea of my own stuff, and I have seen posted things of friends who have had significantly more damage than I experienced only 5 to 6 miles south of my house. So my concern would be as you start to look at about Isla Mirada, Marathon, south towards Key West, I think we're going to see significant problems, and it's going to be a very long road to recovery in a place that is virtually 100% dependent on tourism.
Yeah,
Just one quick one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just put in context how bad the Virgin Islands were hit compared to other surrounding areas, or maybe compare the damage in Puerto Rico to the Virgin Islands.
You know, without having an assessment of Puerto Rico yet, I really couldn't do that.
Just the Virgin Islands, then. Can you just put into context the damage, describe the damage in the Virgin Islands?
90% power outages. You know, one of the challenges we have in the Virgin Islands is that they have a lot of above ground power lines, and so that's going to take a long time to fix. When I was over there driving on the different roads and surveying the damage, a lot of down power lines and poles across the road, a lot of debris, a lot of homes, you know, in different stages of most affected in some way, some very seriously. It's very extensive, but I would also of note, they were really energized to get after this and to start making progress. So just within from the 2 days before I got there, our commander on the ground had driving by gas stations, for example, and there were long lines to get fuel. By the time I was there, just 48 hours later, there weren't fuel lines anymore. We were able to go around the entire island with our vehicle, which was an incredible improvement compared to 48 hours before. Then I made a second visit 2 days later, and it was already better. There was a couple of restaurants open, there were grocery stores open, so they're really trying to make the improvements while the rest of us are supporting them. So Maria was definitely an unfortunate setback.
In general, did you say that every home in the Virgin Islands to some degree was damaged?
I would not say every home in the Virgin Islands was damaged, but I would say probably most families affected in one way or the other.
Okay. All right, guys. General Rydholm, General Holland, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.